Hi everyone, Miss Dennis here, and today we're going to be reading Carl's Garden Problem and to complete task number 1. So for this lesson, you need to find your Carl's Garden Problem text. And if you look at this picture, you can kind of see it has a little title, and then there's a little picture of some plants that look like they're growing up the front of it. And we're going to need that text, as well as we need the graphic organizer and task 1 directions that look like this. There's like a beginning, middle, end, and it's one of those foldable graphic organizers. So you're going to need all of that for our task today. So as we look at the first part of our story, I really want you to take a second and lock in your brain and think about the title of the story, Carl's Garden Problem. And looking at the picture, I just want to give you a few seconds to lock in your brain what you think the story might be about. Good thinking, friends. Now, if I were looking at the title and looking at this picture, it says Carl's Garden Problem. So maybe Carl was having a problem growing his plants or some type of problem in his garden. So maybe that's just something to think about as we read our story. Now, if you actually look at our graphic organizer, we're going to be focusing on the beginning, middle, and end of the story. So what I've done to kind of help us is I've already divided up our story between the beginning, middle, and end. So that's going to help us when we go to our graphic organizer and looking back in the text. Kids already kind of tell us where it's at. So that's there to kind of help us. So with this being our first task for the story, I'm going to read the story to you. It's kind of a shorter story. So again, as a teacher or an adult is reading to you, make sure you are following along with your finger or pencil so your brain can really focus on what we're reading. So let's get started. It says Carl wanted to grow a garden. Miss Sanchez was Carl's neighbor. She gave Carl flower seeds. Carl planted them. Mr. Brown was Carl's neighbor too. He saw Carl planting. I have vegetable plants in pots, Mr. Brown said. Would you like to plant those too? Yes, thank you, said Carl. Mr. Brown helped Carl plant the vegetables. My vegetables keep falling over, said Carl. Mr. Brown went to his shed. He came back with long, thin sticks. These are tomato stakes. They will hold the plants up, said Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown put the stakes in the ground. Now the plants will grow tall, said Carl. So now that we have read the story, I want you to get out the graphic organizer. And if you would like to fold and cut at this time, if you read the directions, this black line right here, you're going to fold your paper in half, and then you can use scissors or have an adult kind of try to help you cut these dotted lines right here. So you're going to cut those just on the dotted line and fold right here on the dark one. But today in this video, we're just going to focus on writing what happened in the beginning, middle, and end of our story. So I've kind of created a slide for each of them to help us. So here we're going to write what happened in the beginning of our story. So let's go back in the story because that's really important for us to go back and reread. So let's look in the beginning. It says Carl wanted to grow a garden. Miss Sanchez was Carl's neighbor. She gave Carl flower seeds. Carl planted them. Mr. Brown was Carl's neighbor too. He saw Carl planting. So what happened first in the story? Carl wanted to grow a garden. Good job. So that's what we're going to add here to our graphic organizer. Carl wanted to grow a garden. So I'm going to leave that here, and I can make it a little bit bigger for you if you need it. So you can take a few seconds here to copy it. Great job. If you need some more time copying it, just pause the video before we go on. So now we're going to go on to the middle. So let's go back and reread the middle of our story. I have vegetable plants in pots, Mr. Brown said. Would you like to plant those too? Yes, thank you, said Carl. Mr. Brown helped Carl plant the gardens. So that was a really kind neighbor, right? So what did Mr. Brown do? What did he do? You guys are right. He helped Carl plant the garden. So let's add that to our graphic organizer. We can say Mr. Brown gave Carl vegetable plants to grow. Now remember, we always need to make sure to capitalize names. So make sure you capitalize Mr. Brown like I did here, and also Carl. And don't forget about those periods at the end. I'm going to give you a few seconds to write. And then you could also, if you need more time, to pause. All right, if you need more time, don't feel free just to pause the video, and we'll go on to our ending. I might have to move my picture here. There he goes. Okay, so now we're going to look at the ending of our story. So let's go back and reread our ending part. It says, my vegetables keep falling over, said Carl. He has a little problem there. Mr. Brown went to his shed. He came back with long, thin sticks. These are tomato stakes. They will hold the plants up, said Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown put the stakes in the ground. Now the plants will grow tall, said Carl. So we had this problem about vegetables falling over, but how did Mr. Brown help? He's been very helpful to Carl. You guys are right. Mr. Brown put stakes in the ground so his plants wouldn't fall over. So we can add that to the ending of our graphic organizer. That Mr. Brown, again, remember capitalizing those names. Mr. Brown put stakes in the ground to help his plants not fall over. Now this one's a little bit longer, so you might have to make sure to try to write a little bit smaller in that graphic organizer for this sentence. But just remember to make sure that you have capitalized those names in the beginning of every sentence and add those periods. And remember, finger spacing in between those words. So again, if you need to, you can always go back and pause some of our videos or rewatch it if you need more help writing the graphic organizer. But thank you guys for listening to our story, and I hope this helped you fill out the graphic organizer. Bye.